Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Angela, and I am absolutely thrilled to have Chad Scott here with me. Chad is a therapist, an author, an educator, and a liver transplant survivor who turned deep personal adversity into a mission to explore the world's most emotionally powerful and historically significant places. His critically acclaimed book, Beyond the Darkness, drives into dark tourism, not to glorify tragedy, but to uncover what sites like Auschwitz, Ground Zero, historic cemeteries, battlefields, and former prisons can teach us about healing, resilience, and what it means to be human. As someone who nearly lost everything, his health, his marriage, and his identity, he now guides others through stories that help them confront pain, discover purpose, and grow stronger on the other side of struggle. He brings both clinical insight and lived experience to conversations around mental health, transformation, and meaningful travel. So, welcome to the podcast, Chad. Thank you for being here today.
Hey Angela, thanks for having me. I hear that intro and I get emotional even hearing that because I don't think of myself that way and it's like yeah, that's me. Oh my gosh. So
Isn't
thank
that
you.
something? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting how our lives can take this path
Yeah.
and we're just in it. And sometimes we don't take the time to reflect. And when we get a chance to do that, it is sometimes kind of surprising where
Yeah.
we've come.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's hearing yeah, like you say, hearing that introduction, it reminds me of the darkness I've been through and the struggles I've been through, and it just feels so different being in my body now, because I've gone through such a transition and transformation, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a great journey.
yeah, yeah. It's so cool. So, what made you want to go touring around these places?
Yeah, I would have to step way back to my childhood, and my parents did a lot of traveling, and we stopped at a lot of historical places and museums, and I always had an interest in battlefields and GI Joes and things like that. And then getting into my adult world life, um, I started traveling a lot on my own or when I was married, and we ended up kind of getting into going to, historical places. I've always had an interest in history, always had an interest in psychology, or at least as an adult. And dark tourism really meshes those two really well. And my
Mm.
wife at the time, no, my ex-wife, but we, she was a psychology major and had a lot of the same history interests. So we just loved going to those places. And after the divorce, I just, started really traveling to some of the world's most significant dark places, and found them to be really healing,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah,
interesting.
it is interesting because, you would think that, and I think for a big part of my life, I thought that when you dive into that sort of stuff, it just makes you sad and just,
Yeah.
dis brings you to despair, right? Because you're almost reliving that experience. I mean, I couldn't even watch,
Right.
and I still can't watch really scary movies or
Hmm.
with a lot of tragedy in them because it affects me almost as if I was there, right?
Right. Right.
And so when you talk about this, and I kind of get it now that my husband's passed away and I've gone through this really dark
Hmm.
place. I sort of
Yeah.
get where you're coming from, but I want to hear more from
Yeah.
you about how
Well,
that was helpful.
yeah, first off, I would say going to a lot of these places, some of these places are really just interesting. Some of these places are actually fun where, they're not on the site of where tragedy took place. It's talking about things that happened, you know, hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago in some places, cases, like going to the Roman Colosseum. You can
Yeah.
reflect on the gladiators and what it would be like, and you get a sense of, the reverence and the awe. But it's been, a couple thousand years since the gladiators fought there. So
Right.
it's not something that, really hits you like going to Ground Zero, or
Mhm.
even the Whitney Plantation, which is a place down by New Orleans that um, really tells the story of a plantation through the eyes of the slaves, which is just one of the most humbling places I've ever been. And it's not those places, especially the darker places like Hiroshima, Auschwitz, even the Paris catacombs to some degree. Some of these places, it's not necessarily a pleasant experience.
Mhm.
It is a dark experience. Um, I feel sad. I felt sick going through, especially Hiroshima and Auschwitz. I felt absolutely sick going through those places, thinking of what humans did to humans, and in Hiroshima, what Americans did to a civilian, you know, two major civilian metropolis populations, and um, but going to those places, when you come out the other side of them, and especially when you get weeks behind you, not even just days, but weeks, you really feel like you um, kind of carry the torch for the people that suffered there, the
Mhm.
people that died there, and so they didn't live in, die in vain, and um, and you kind of gifted. So when I went through some really dark times with illness, divorce, more illness, and then I ended up having a liver transplant. And that's really long story short, but I found that during my darkest hours, I would reflect on some of these things that I had learned when I was in, Normandy or, Ground Zero or whatever. And I reflect on that, and for some reason, kind of feels like you're not so alone in your darkness.
Mhm.
When you go to those places, it's almost like a little mirror emerges, and you see little pieces of yourself. So when you go in with a lot of reverence for what happened there and what people went through there in those places, and a lot of empathy. So you're trying to empathize. One of the most life-changing experiences of my life was walking down the steps into the crematorium one at Auschwitz, was where they had still it's the only gas chamber that's still standing. And you go in there, and my tour group went into the next room, and I'm standing there alone and just thinking of, the for one, energy. There's a lot of energy still
Mhm.
in those places, and you feel it, and you feel the sadness, the sadness coming up from the cracks in the walls and the scratches in the walls from fingernails, and I mean, it's awful. But you go out the other side of that building, and you realize you're a changed person. I definitely, it makes you appreciate what you have more. Sights are more beautiful, sounds sound better. I mean, everything is better when you go through the darkness. And I think a lot of people that have gone through grief have that same, experience, whether it's grief or dark tourism. Dark tourism kind of in a microcosm is similar to grief in a way. I mean, it's not grief. I mean, but it's
Mhm.
you get some of those similarities, and you're a stronger person because you go through that darkness.
Wow. That is so profound. And I had never thought about it like that. It was just not something I get that because I understand going through this grief. I come out on the other
Hmm.
side and everything, I get what you're saying about everything's more
Yeah.
colorful. You
Yeah.
appreciate things more. You value, that little things don't bother you as much. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of things that
Yeah.
change through that. But I never
Yeah.
realized that you could get that gift visiting some of these places, which is fascinating. And it makes perfect sense.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you talk to people that have, somebody has passed away or they've had an illness like I had, I mean, that's a life-changing experience having a
Yeah.
liver disease where you don't know if you're going to live or die necessarily, or going through the transplant, or astronauts, they have the astronaut effect where they look down at Earth from far above, and it's just life-changing right then and there because they see how small they are in this way. It's a perspective change. And when you going to religious sites also, so some people when they go to Jerusalem, for example, or Mecca, um, people's lives are changed when they are stepping on hallowed ground. And I feel like dark tourism is hallowed ground. You ask a lot of the same questions you ask when you're probably looking down at Earth, or,
Mhm.
looking at a spiritual site, or, you ask the big questions like, what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Where do I go when I die, even? So it's
Mhm.
really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you survived a liver transplant and a
Yeah.
divorce. And what helped, like, what exactly helped you get through those things?
Lots of things. Yeah. I can't say it was any one thing.
Right.
If it was any one thing, it's a perspective shift. Um,
Right.
so I will say my life was pretty easy and pretty rosy. I mean, yeah, I had to deal with some things, um, I struggled in school early on, and then but I got to college, and then I did well, and then I had a great career, and then I got passed over for a CEO, kind of due to nepotism, and then so I had bumps in the road, but nothing that was life changing until I ended up getting a autoimmune disease called vasculitis, and I didn't know if I had a type that's possibly deadly and had to be treated by chemotherapy, or do I have a type that's, will go away. And at the same time, my wife started, I had this lovely marriage. I mean, it was a beautiful 10, 11 years. I couldn't have been more in love with somebody. And 10, 11 years into it, all of a sudden it starts falling apart as my health starts falling apart. And then my dad ends up in the hospital with sepsis. And the doctor literally said, it's a coin flip whether he is going to make it or not.
Mm.
And so I had this great, easy life. And then all of a sudden, it just like the rug gets pulled out underneath me. And I think a lot of people that have gone through grief have felt like the rug just is pulled out underneath them. And now, like, what do you do? And I think that's, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I think that's what happened is like I couldn't have been a worse failure, really, in that time. And then I just said, enough of this. I have to start building myself. And what I found is so I did, the typical things. I went to therapy, I went on medication. Um, I started doing what I'd call adventure tourism, where I'd go to like Costa Rica or have animal encounters or just different things that are little, anytime that you step out of your comfort zone, I think it's healthy.
Mhm.
Um, well, I shouldn't say anytime, most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's things you can do that aren't healthy, but um, so I did a lot of that kind of stuff, and then really found, and I started gravitating towards dark tourism, especially when I was diagnosed with liver disease and found out that I might need a transplant, and so I started going to the world's darkest places. That's when I went to Auschwitz and some other places, um, and those really came back to gift me when I was going through the darkest part of that. I actually did it, I say dark, but to me it wasn't. It should have been objectively the darkest time in my life when I didn't know. I thought I had liver cancer for a long time, and which has a 5% survival rate. They had misdiagnosed me,
Mm.
and found out, that I didn't, but then not long after that, then I found out that I have to have a liver transplant. And so what should have objectively been the worst time of my life was actually I went through it. It was almost like an adventure to me because I had learned so much prior and learned so much through these dark tourism spots. And it's not only learning on an intellectual level, it's learning on an emotional and spiritual level. I can tell you that, and there's a good book that there's dark tourism is actually an academic discipline, and the person who wrote my foreword, Dr. Stone, he is likely the world's foremost academic right now in dark tourism, and he gave me a book called well, actually I don't remember what it's called, but it's about how religious pilgrimages and dark tourism have a strong overlap, and I already had thought about that. I already wrote a chapter about that in my book because, Jerusalem, I talk about Jerusalem as a dark tourism spot because there's so much things that happened in Jerusalem that are dark.
Um, you've got a question here that I think is very fascinating. It says, of
Sure.
all the places you visited, from Auschwitz to eerie cemeteries, which ones shook you the most and why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, it depends on where you are in your own life at that very moment, I think. Depends also on when you step into those, what your mindset is on that very day.
Right.
If you have stress going on in your own life and things like that. So, what hit me the hardest, Auschwitz and Hiroshima definitely hit me the hardest. The Whitney plantation, but um, I would also say that some places that might be in your backyard are very meaningful. I went to the donor wall for liver donors, and in Richmond, Virginia. And that really hit me. I didn't think it
Yeah.
would hit me as hard. And I guess that would sort of be considered dark tourism because you're going there to reflect on other people's lives and their deaths and
Hmm.
what the meaning of their lives were. And here I was when I was there. I think I was, it was maybe 4 months after my transplant. I went out there, and I never found out who my donor was. I wrote the family a letter, and it's up to them whether they write a letter back. And they hadn't, so I just wanted to go pay my respects to my donor, and that was one way I could do that. So, um,
Hmm.
so it kind of depends on where you're at in your life is where what's the most meaningful at that time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's fascinating how I'm just thinking about, you're going to these places and you're having compassion and empathy, probably more compassion. I like the word compassion better than
Hmm.
empathy because I always think empathy, you get yourself in that place where you're in that lower vibration.
Yeah.
Compassion is more about empowering,
Hmm.
people, understanding and empowering. And I feel like, sitting with people in grief would have a similar effect, but we're afraid to do that, right? it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
awkward to do that. It's awkward to sit with someone who's really sad or in despair, and we
Right.
just want to fix it really quick so that it goes away, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just much to
Yeah.
take. But
Yeah. Well, I'm in my therapy office right now, and when people come in, um, that's why they come to a therapist is
Mhm.
I could try to solve their problems. I could say, well, do this, do that, do that. And sometimes that's what they want. They don't want to necessarily sit and talk. But what ends up happening is it's kind of like some people want to put a lid on things. And
Right.
and and I talk about dark tourism as you can go to Auschwitz or Ground Zero Museum or wherever, Pearl Harbor, I mean, wherever, and you can go tick off the boxes like you're a tourist, and just read the the plaques and things, and not really learn anything on an emotional level. And I advocate for really stepping and trying to empathize, or show compassion,
Mhm.
but um, but really trying to picture what it was like. And when you do that, that's when it really comes back to gift you and change you. And because you're not just going to these places as if it's a part of history. You're going to those places because you're really reflecting on what it was like to be there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And in therapy, that's the same thing, is people really want to, be able to or what people get the most out of therapy is usually when they open up and just really talk about their vulnerable feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, and to have someone who has the capacity to sit with that. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that, therapists are amazing people, and yet we are so afraid, many of us, to go to go see a therapist. In fact, I remember thinking to myself when my husband was sick and there was a counselor made available for
Hmm.
us, and I kept thinking, well, what's the counselor going to do? Like,
Right.
what are they going to do? They
Right.
can't help me. He's got a illness that could kill him, and if he dies, there's nothing they can do. And
Yeah.
it was such when I did actually sign up with the grief coach, it was so enlightening to find out how much they really can do for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a huge advocate for not going through these things by yourself and to seek out support.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
I think, you know, dark tourism for me really taught me on a healthy level. I used to think a stoic was somebody like John Wayne, where it's like, you know, nothing bothers me, put the lid on it type of mentality. And what I learned is that um, going through these places, it's you learn to be able to control the things you can control, and accept the things you need to accept that you really can't control. Sort of like the Serenity Prayer, though, and the wisdom to know the difference. But um, yeah, so Stoicism is really good, but some people also think Stoics they don't need anybody, but at the same time, we need people, So if you can be a stoic, but also lean into the people that are in your circle, and if you don't have people that are in your circle, hire somebody like me, a therapist, or, to start creating a social circle that, and you have the best of both worlds. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go into these places, like, so for myself, I'm an empath. And so when I
Yeah.
walk into these, so I'm thinking about Pearl Harbor, went to Pearl Harbor and became a little
Hmm.
overwhelmed with the energy that was there
Yeah.
and almost couldn't take it. It was like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really had to use a lot of tools to stay and to sit in that energy. And so,
Hmm.
what advice do you have for people?
Start small. Start local. You don't have to go right to Pearl Harbor. You don't have to go right to the big places. You can start, for example, I I was in Rochester, Minnesota yesterday, and um, we went, we were touring Mayo and the Mayo Clinic, and there was a graveyard there that like, oh, that looks like a neat historic cemetery. And the Mayo, we actually didn't find the Mayo brothers. They're buried there. But but we did find a place where it talked about people that donated their bodies to science, and and just sitting and reflecting on these people that have donated their bodies to science. So there's these above ground tombs that they and actually I talked to a woman there. She was cleaning it off, and I was asking like, well, I thought she was a worker, and she wasn't. She was there cleaning it off because her mother was in there, or her father was in there, and her sister was in there. They both donated their bodies to science, and she said, one day I'm going to be in here. So that really hits you. It's like, you know you're really, are already thinking of your death, and you want your death to contribute to something. And I mean, it's just really humbling. And so when you go to dark tours and places, and then we ran across Civil War. I had to look up some things like, well, what does GAR mean? And and it meant that they were in the Civil War. um,
Hmm.
so I mean, just interesting things every time you go to a cemetery. And you don't have to be, like I say, you don't have to go to the biggest heavy hitting dark places. You can start
Right.
small. Go to a local memorial.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, some people would say that's morbid.
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it is.
they would
It is in a
describe it
way.
as morbid. Um, and would say that that's a bad thing. I mean, I remember my parents, I don't know if it was my parents, but people take pictures sometimes of cemeteries or, funerals, caskets. And I always thought, ooh, that's like, why would you do that?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think when you go into these places, it's what's in your heart. It's
Yeah.
really what's in your heart. It's what your motives are for going to these places. So if somebody's going to a place to kind of get their rocks off on tragedy, you're going for the wrong reasons, and you're actually, you know, going to these places actually helps a person become more empathetic. Where if you go to one of these places with, kind of that in your heart, the sensationalism of it, like, oh, I need to go check this out and see, kind of getting off on other people's suffering,
Right.
you're harming yourself. You're hurting your ability to empathize. So next time you see a dog get run over or something, it might not even bother you. I mean, like
Right.
it so it can desensitize a person if they're going in for the wrong reasons. If you're going in for the right reasons, it can kind of help you in many ways that you are unaware of. Because actually, I didn't even realize this until I was actually after my transplant, I went out to Los Angeles to get some continuing education health credits, or whatever, and I ended up taking several days to just kind of tour the area too. But very first place I went was a cemetery called Hollywood Forever. It has Judy Garland and Burt Reynolds and Chris Cornell, lots of celebrities, and it's underneath the Hollywood sign and whatever. But um, it And then the next day I went to another cemetery in, Marilyn Monroe, Roger Dangerfield, so all kind of Barney Fife. Um, and then I was pondering like, why am I always in these places? And then that's when it just like the subconscious became conscious, and I like these places have really helped me. And I thought back to when I was going through my transplant and all the reflections I had back on, Normandy or the, Auschwitz, and how those spoke to me during my darkest hours. And it's like, I really need to tell somebody about this. So I actually put
Mhm.
out a concise edition of my book, just to see if anybody was interested. And it was more just a self-published book. But this Dr. Stone had read it, and he had contacted me, the one the foremost expert in dark tourism, and he
Right.
had contacted me and said, I really like that. And and it was built on his theory, even though I had never read about his. Like I purposely actually didn't look at the research because I wanted it to be my own.
Hmm.
But it picked up on some ideas that research picked up on, and then I started getting familiar with the research. And dark tourism really is shown in research to be beneficial for people, of all walks of life. But again, you probably don't want to go in, you know, if you're a very much an empath type person, you probably don't want to go to the darkest place right away. You want to ease into it if that's what you're
Right.
wanting to do. And there's ways of doing that it's actually like I said, those can actually be fun, where going on a ghost tour where they bring you around like New Orleans or whatever, or even they have cemetery tours, which seems a little more morbid, but it's not super dark either. You're with a tour guide and you just feel a little safer.
Hmm.
Um, you know, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
lots of ways to get into it.
Well, and I like how you talk about, you're going into it with an intention, with a proper
Yeah.
intention.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really important, to know why you're going there and what you're stepping into. And it sounds to me, and I get this, I totally get this, um, that there can be such benefits for us, such lessons to learn from those tragedies, and how people have overcome such significant loss and change and
Mhm.
trauma in their lives, and often go on to do amazing things,
Yeah. Yeah.
because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you go to places, for example, the Whitney plantation down by New Orleans, it, again talks about the slavery point of view. The main house there is just a walkthrough. They don't have the beautiful furniture that a lot of plantations would have. Um, but it talks about, so when I think of slavery, I think a lot about the men, the men getting whipped, and but there they talk a lot about the women and the children too. And it's like, wow, so when I leave there, I'm thinking a lot about children. And
Mhm.
but anyway, when I go to all these places, a lot of times when you learn about Auschwitz, you think about the people who went through it. But when you're there, you also think about the their loved ones that survived, and they no longer have this person because they were gassed, or somebody at Pearl Harbor. Okay, this is their child that died, and you think about those people more. And and when you leave there, yeah, you get a sense like these people made it through some really horrible, horrible things, as relatives and loved ones, and family and
Mhm.
friends. And our darkness, we can get through it too. Millions and millions, billions of people have, everybody is going to experience darkness at some point. Everybody's parents are going to die. Everybody,
Mhm.
so it's sad. It's horrible to think about, but at the same time, um, you can, you can make it through those hard times.
Yeah,
And then once you get through it, kind of becomes your superpower.
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that gives people a lot of hope and
Yeah.
inspiration when they are in their darkest place, to hear that you can move through that.
Yeah.
And there's people like you out there to help them through. That's so
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. People think that, when a loved one dies or somebody's diagnosed with a disease, somebody's sexually assaulted, I mean, all these horrible things, car accidents, fires, whatever, they're not good things, but you can turn them into something that, you know, you don't necessarily turn them into something good, but you turn, what you become into something good because of it. And, otherwise you can keep the lid on your emotions and you can and not progress and you can stay living in your comfort zone and over time, nothing grows in a comfort zone. And over time, your comfort zone gets smaller and smaller and smaller if you never step foot outside of it. And the only thing that grows really in a comfort zone is misery, depression, loneliness, anxiety, those
Yeah.
types of things.
Yeah. And there's so many, and my heart really breaks when I see, on social media, people who have lost their loved ones, had these traumatic things happen to them, and haven't been able to come through that after many,
Yeah.
many years. It's and so, the podcast, because I,
Yeah.
how else do you help people
Right.
except to share your story and hope
Right.
that people will resonate and be able to take something from
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who have made it through the darkness who want to share what it's like on the other side because, as human beings, I think most of us, not all of us,
Mhm.
definitely, looking at the United States right now, there's a lot of
Yeah.
culture wars going, and we'll put it nicely. But um, yeah, going through that stuff can really be your superpower.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I truly believe that too. And I see it time and time again. And that's
Yeah,
what this is all about, is talking to people about that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
We have this natural tendency to want to, I guess where I was going with that, a lot of people want to help other people. Most people
yes.
want to help other people. And when we've gone through this darkness, we've like, oh my God, we feel like our lives are over when we're going through it. I'm lucky to have lived through that dark time in my life, when I was really during my divorce and when I felt my marriage falling apart. And I mean, I could have cashed in my chips easy at that time. Um, but I didn't, and I fought, and I became a new version of myself that I love my life. Like
Yeah. Well, and there you just said something. You become a new version of yourself
yeah,
because the old version is no longer. And sometimes that's really hard to accept, because we loved our life and the way it was. And
yeah,
it's really hard to look back and say, okay, well, I can't live that life anymore. Um,
right,
and it can be really depressing. Yet there's something about creating that new you and stepping into the unknown that can be
yeah,
exciting too. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be scary
right,
necessarily, but there is that element of fear because you have no idea what the future is going to
yeah,
bring. But there is that excitement and curiosity that can be a part of it as well.
yeah. Acceptance is not. I think when people get to that part, if we're going through the phases and
Mm,
I mean, you get to that acceptance part, but you know, I think a lot of people are reluctant to go into the acceptance because they feel like they've given up or,
yeah.
and it just kind of prolongs that misery. So at some point you have to, accept and it doesn't mean you forget, it's
Oh,
kind of, it's just kind of accepting and not forgetting.
yeah,
And then you can do that. You can have both.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it really is a choice, and sometimes a really hard one to make.
Yeah. 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 And it doesn't necessarily feel like a choice, but it's a choice at some point.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Can you tell people how they can find you, what you offer?
It would be my pleasure. So you can find me at drchadscott.com. Um, I'm on Facebook is kind of my main social media, and that's Chad Scott Author. I guess that's really about the only places you can find me.
Yeah, well,
Unless
and that's
unless you live
even
unless you
great.
live in northern Minnesota, I have a therapy office here. So I mean I travel around and I do talks and
Nice.
yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah. So do you mostly travel in the United States? Is that where you?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm sure people can find that information on
They
your
sure can. Yeah.
website. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And is there anything else you'd like to add? before we go?
Just, when you feel like you can't go on, when life gets dark, remember what we talked about today is, that can become your superpower, and it doesn't feel like it's going to be. It feels like it's never going to end, but it does end, and life does get better. You just got to keep, that's where that grit comes in, and you can do it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to share your message. And I want to thank everyone for listening.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's
Yeah, you
been a
are
pleasure.
welcome. The pleasure's
Yeah.
all mine.
All right.
And bye for now.